because we're always trying to find something different way of seeing the world, different way of looking at things, presenting a unique view, and infrared photography certainly does that, because it's a great tool in itself. It's a lot of fun in itself, but it also is a great teaching tool, because then the way that you look for the infrared light is very informative for your normal camera technique, because you tend to look at your composition, and you look at the light in your composition differently once you've been looking for infrared light. So what we'll do first, we'll just got a late start. Got a couple of those characters in. Kerry's coming. So I'll share my screen. I'll just have a look at 3 or 4 images first, talk through those, and then we'll talk a little bit about what infrared photography is, what you've got to do to your camera, to some things you can do to your camera to get the ability to shoot in infrared, and then take you through some other images. And at the end, I've got a couple of infrared images just to process quickly, so you can see what's involved in getting an infrared image up and over the line as something a little bit more interesting to look at. So we'll hit the share screen. And hopefully that will come. Well, I don't need that one. We'll do a slideshow, and we'll start from the beginning. So everybody got that nice grey slide to have a look at? Yep. So I thought, in honour of the Binalong tree, we could have it on the cover this evening. So for those who don't know, our version of the Wanaka tree got blown over in the storms that they had in Tassie a few weeks ago. So that's no longer there. So this is a historical record. And when we were down there, I think Rick was with us, and I think Judy is online with us tonight. But we had the Mossman Camera Club had a trip down to Tassie, and we went up to Binalong, and we photographed the tree here. So this is a shot from just before our first lot of lockdowns. So a little historical record. So there's 4 images here. They're all panorama. So this one's a 3-image stitch, I think, and up on Observatory Hill. And one of the interesting things, and it's actually called, I think it's called the wood effect, because that's the guy who discovered it, is the foliage. Most dark green foliage goes bright white in infrared. So you get this fantastic inverse effect with the image. And the other thing that happens is that the sky, if you think about it, so infrared being above red in the red spectrum, if you've got anything blue, it goes black, all right, because it's absorbing all the red, because it's blue. So if you've got a really dark blue sky, it'll end up completely pitch black. So you can get this effect where you've got your white leaves against a black sky, which is pretty cool. And then you can play with the shadows and play with the other things to just mix and match with the effect that you're getting. So you can see when you look into the distance there, you get some things that look kind of normal, some things that look a bit different. So the buildings and the harbour bridge, they look kind of normal until you get to the top and the flags are white. So there's some things that infrared doesn't do too much to, but other things which are quite spectacular, and foliage is one of them. So foliage tends to be the big ticket item. This was single shot. So this is taken down. So the 5th Chapter estate's down near Bowral, and it's a property of a friend of ours who's got he's got a little bit of a vineyard he's got there, and he's got all the 140 acres or something down there. So got a fantastic spot to play on the weekends. And this was just before there was a big southerly change coming, and this was that time where you get on a sort of warm summery afternoon where everything goes really still, the cloud builds up, and you've still got the heat sort of permeating through, but everything's really quite still. So the sky was totally clouded over, and the water was completely still, as you can see, just with that little bit of movement from that bird or a fish that's in the background. So just like if you've got a blue sky, water tends to absorb infrared, and there again you'll get either these fantastic shadows or the water goes completely black because it's absorbed the light. So this was just and I think this one, which we'll see in others, one of the things that really attracts me to infrared is the subtlety in the shadows. So when you look in there, just the softness in the shadows and the number of different shades that you get in the shadows, just a really subtle, beautiful light that you get in the infrared. This was one of those south coast lows rolling in at Wollongong Harbour, and it was taken from the outside. Those who know Wollongong Harbour, there's a shot from the other side of the harbour with a telephoto lens. So I use a little Sony. We'll get to the lens I use, and I borrowed Robin's. Robin's got all the telephoto lenses, so I think this was shot at about 300 mils. So it's quite a distant shot, and that you can then see the grain that's in the image. So reasonably dark because it was quite stormy. You had the big waves smashing up over the rocks, but you can also see that it is a longish exposure. Because look at the water running over the edge to the left of the lighthouse. So just as you can get the different effects with your normal light for long exposure, you can also do long exposure in infrared, so which is kind of cool. You can see there's quite a few spots where the highlights are burnt out, and that's just one of the issues with dealing with infrared, is just getting your exposure settings right so you're not losing those highlights, because and it's very hard to control. This is an early morning shot over at Mrs. Macquarie's chair looking back to the city, so just after sunrise. One of the great things about infrared is that the great time of days for the light is about an hour after sunrise and about an hour before sunset. They're the two most beautiful times for the subtle light, and if you want that really dark sky with a really harsh high contrast, then middle of the day, somewhere out in the middle of New South Wales, away from the coast, where you got that sort of cobalt blue sky, or somewhere up in the tropics, you can get some really graphic black and whites in the middle of the day. But first thing in the morning you get beautiful subtle light. Last thing in the afternoon you get that subtle light as well. So there's just after sunrise, the light's just starting to flick the buildings in the city. So you've still got quite a dark sky because of the absorption of the infrared into the sky there, and then you can then place upon that sort of dark background the buildings plus the foliage that's just getting licked by by that first morning light. Refusing to proceed. Here we go. So, what is infrared? So for those who didn't do science at school or aren't scientifically inclined, this gives you a little bit of a summary of what goes on. All right. So so light is in waves. All right, and the wavelength is nanometers, and between 400 nanometers and 700 nanometers is what we see. So the rainbow happens between 400 and 700 nanometers, and then you've got UV, ultraviolet. So you've got violet at the bottom of the visible spectrum. So ultraviolet is below violet. So that's ultraviolet, and infra is above. So infrared is above red because you've got red to the right of the spectrum. All right. So so there's near infrared and far infrared. The far infrared is the stuff they use for thermal imaging, and the near infrared is what we're using for infrared photography. And just your standard camera sensor is the little graphic on the bottom left. So there's a filter over the sensor which reflects infrared, reflects ultraviolet, and lets through visible light. And in the case of an infrared camera, which is the middle one, it reflects visible light, so they take off the hot mirror and they put on a different filter, and it lets infrared through to the sensor. All right, and depending on which infrared wavelength filter it is, depends how much you can let a touch of visible light through, and we'll show you what that does, because then you can get some colour with the effect of the infrared. And then there's this other thing you can do now, which is called a full spectrum conversion, where there's essentially no filter over the sensor, and all the infrared, all the visible light, and all the ultraviolet go through to the sensor, and then you can put a series of filters on the lens to then either control the infrared or the visible or the ultraviolet, so you can muck around with what actually gets across to the sensor. So that's about as concise a summary as you can get for infrared and what we see in the various colours. So in this is the only bit of text, so but I had to put it down like this because it's about the only way to convey it. So back in the darkroom days, essentially you had to put a quite an opaque filter on the front of your lens, and it was because it was blocking out the visible light. You weren't able to look through it. All right. So what you'd have to do is you'd have to set up your camera, you do the focus, do the composition, then you'd have to screw this almost black filter on, and then expose sometimes up to 30 seconds to be able to take an infrared capture, or to capture an infrared scene. All right. These days, which is in my case what I've got, so I've got a little Sony A7R camera, which I've had the sensor modified on, and like that previous picture, what they've done is they've taken off the infrared filter and then put on a filter that lets through the infrared, which means I can now operate my Sony A7R handheld, and just as I would a normal camera, and on the live view I actually see in infrared, and I see what the camera's seeing in infrared. So it's a lot more flexible than it used to be. So all the old-fashioned infrared images, which relied on either sort of a red filter, orange filter, I think there was a green and a yellow and different combinations just to control what the light was doing. A lot easier when the sensor's actually modified, and that's a permanent modification. All right? So I can only, with my camera, I can only take infrared images, which is when that other conversion comes into play, where they say where you can do a full spectrum modification, because then you can still use it to take normal visible light photos. But in my case, my camera is permanently modified just for infrared. For those who might have used old film cameras, you've probably seen some of the old lenses actually have different markings for focus for infrared and for visible light on them. They've got like a little red band, and it's slightly different because there's a different diffraction between infrared and visible light. So what's in focus in visible light isn't always in focus in infrared. So there's got to be that little adjustment, and most old school lenses used to do that for those who want to do their infrared photography. And the only other issue that pops up with infrared is that because of the nature of the lens, it can actually it focuses the infrared to the centre of the image, and you can get like a foggy hotspot. And depending on the lens, depends on how bad that hotspot is. And in general terms, a zoom lens is worse than a prime lens because there's more glass and there's more opportunity for the hotspot to develop. All right, so that's all the technical stuff out of the way, and then we can have a little bit more chat about some images and what we can do with some images. So this is so to get your camera converted to infrared, there's two places in the US which are probably the best. One is Kalari Vision, and that's the one that I have gone to. There's also a crew in Melbourne who have started to do it. So there is a local company that does conversions in Melbourne. And this is a summary sheet from Kalari, and it shows you the different effects and different filters and what you can achieve with them. All right, so if you remember everything above, so once we got to the 500 nanometers, we're into the near infrared, and then so essentially most infrared's between around 500 and 900, and the 590 filter, which is the one at the top, actually lets through a touch of visible light, which means that you can then do what it shows you across the top. So the picture on the left is straight from camera. In infrared processing, there's a process where you swap the blue and the red channels, and that then gives you a blue sky, which most people like. So essentially what's happened is that the picture on the top left, they've had the red and blue channel swap, which means you get the yellow foliage and the dark blue sky. And then if you then convert that to black and white, that's the sort of contrast look that you get in the next column. And on the far right, this is the image without the white balance adjustment that has to be done to the camera. All right. So each of the bands shows you a little bit of a different effect. So if you're after a nice crisp black and white, then you go to the 850 nanometers because there is no colour in that, and you can see there that the image out of camera is the one on the right, the sort of pinky colour, and the effect that you get is, you know, the really black sky, the white foliage. And so I wanted to do mainly black and white images, so I chose the 850 nanometer filter. When I told Robin what I was doing, she said, "Oh, that's, you know, black and white, that's a bit boring. Why don't you do a bit of colour?" So she actually then got a selfie camera with the 590 nanometer filter. So in the Moon household, we've got the choice of what to shoot with. So we've actually got one of each. So we've got the 590 and the 850. So for the purists who want to do the black and white shots, that camera gets used. And for those who want a bit of a fairy floss, bit of fun with the landscape, then the 590 filter is the one to use. And we've got a couple of shots to show you the difference between the two. And then down the bottom, you can do you can get into all sorts of manners of filters and combinations, and essentially you can just go ballistic with the colorways and the things you can produce. So that's not a full explanation. I've got the website up the top there, the kalarivision.com. Choosing a filter. They've got Kalari's fantastic website. They've got lots of information about what are the good cameras for doing conversion with, how you choose which filter you're going to use, and they go through all the pros and cons of everything. So very informative website. And so if it's something you're thinking of doing, then that'd be a place where you would start your research. So with infrared imaging, it's all, as with all photography, it's all about the light, and it's all about chasing the light, seeing the light, finding the light, and capturing the light. And when you look at the world in infrared, it is just so subtle, and as you move your lens around, you'll see different things. And this first slide shows you the difference. All right, so we're back to our little tree of Binalong, and these two shots were taken within 3 or 4 minutes of each other, and this is purely the difference between the direction that I've pointed the camera in relation to the landscape before me, and also the direction of the sun and what the sun is doing. So the image on the right, the sun's almost directly behind me, which means when I'm looking at the sky beyond, because it's the first thing in the morning, dark sky, lots of blue, it sort of goes black, and the foliage pitches up because it's got that light falling on it with the white highlights. and the rocks start beaming because they've got all that light hitting them. And it's a very contrasty, and it's got lots of distractions in it, hasn't it? Because it's hard to isolate the tree from the background, apart from the tree that's on the far left in the distance, where the tree's almost all white on a dark background. There's a lot going on, and it's hard to simplify the image and to isolate the tree. All right. So essentially, I have walked maybe 20 metres to the left on the right-hand image, and then I've shot with the sun being over on my right shoulder. All right. So by doing that, what I've done is I've then picked up, because the sun's rising, I've got the glow of the sky. All right, that's brightening on the right-hand side. The harshness of that direct light onto the rocks is softened, and I'm then able to create a silhouette out of the same composition, and then pick up a little bit of the dark sky up on the left there, up in the top left of the picture. So same scene, just playing with the direction of light and being aware of what the direction of light does to the image. So it's gone from high contrast on the right to a lot more soft, subtle toning on the left, and they're similarly to the other image I showed you. It's got lots of tone in the shadows, so the shadows aren't completely blacked out. There's still quite a lot of detail there. So the actual process of photographing is kind of cool, because the direction of the light, what the light is doing, it actually dictates the composition to you. So I might come along and I might say, if I was doing a normal visible shot in natural visible spectrum, I'd say, well, I quite like the composition on the right, because I like the rock making the boat. I like the tree sort of sitting on top of the boat, and I want to capture that composition. But the light conditions weren't doing that. All right. So my preconception of what I wanted to capture, I had to put those aside and say, well, what's the light telling me? What's the light giving me? What's the composition that the light has given me? And that resulted in the image on the left. So you can see then, by having gone through that experience in the infrared, then that might also help influence you when you come to taking your normal imaging. So instead of having a preconceived idea of, well, this is the composition I want, then you might come along, you might explore, you might see what the lighting conditions are doing. You might be given a different composition just by interrogating the landscape before you a little bit more. These are another couple which really demonstrate that the subtlety of the light direction, and just even 10 degrees swing on the angle of view can just change it from the light absolutely glowing and beaming to there being not much at all. So this is another one of these so when you go off for your sunrise shoot, absolutely fantastic, because when sunrise is up, that's when you can get your infrared camera out, and you've got another hour to go. All right, so you don't have to go and get your coffee once the sun's over the horizon. You can still wander around and play with the infrared for another hour, which is fantastic. So you can also see on that one on the left, this is in the tea tree bush just near the beach. So we've walked up the path on the left there, up from the beach, and as I swung around, this beautiful light is just washing through the tea tree, and you can see the benefit of the infrared. So this is where the infrared, I think, is absolutely amazing, is just the subtlety in the shadows and the number of greys that there are between black and white, and just that fine detail in the foliage. It's just a delight as a capturing tool, because I have tried in capturing that in normal visible light and then converting to black and white, and you just can't get that subtlety. Just the subtlety in the shadows, the subtlety in the leaves on the ground, just fantastic. So it's a fantastic tool for those sorts of things. So it's almost like a pencil sketch. So it's got the subtlety of the pencil sketch with all the different greys and the tones that are in there. And then the right-hand one is at Bombo. So there again, that's just after sunrise, and this is where the sun is just catching the break of the water after it's smashed into the rocks. All right, so everything else is pretty much black, but then you're getting this layering of those waves in the foreground are like silhouettes against where the sun's coming through at the back. So it's a fantastic. There again, just for it's got to be really soft light. So if I tried this later in the day, you wouldn't be able to get the subtlety in the tonings because it'd just be burnt out and the white would just be too strong. So it's got to be first thing in the morning or last thing in the afternoon, just to have that soft glow as opposed to that full strength beam, and then you can eke out these really subtle tones in the greys and the whites. Around the city is another place where you can play with what the light is doing. The one on the right down to Bradley's Head Amphitheatre is a good example, which probably also informs our normal visible light photography, in that the light source isn't in the photo. All right, but we can see the effect of the light source. So if I was to sort of swing the camera, 10 degrees to the left, the brightness of the sun is just going to be burning out the detail. Whereas if I hang off the sun, but I look at what the sun is doing or what the light of the sun is doing, then that's where the subtlety is. And it's kind of like the old masters approach, isn't it? In the Dutch old masters, they look at. So if you look at any of their paintings, you never see the light source. All right, so the lamp is always behind someone's head, or it's all composed. So you're seeing what the light is doing, how the light is washing over the various surfaces, and that is used for the composition. But you don't actually see the light source, and I think that's what I've learnt in the image on the right, where the subtlety is in excluding the light source and just watching what it does. And similarly, the one on the left, so all these glass towers in the city are fantastic in infrared because they've got, all the glass has got this, it's usually a metal coating on the glass that gives it its solar performance, and that under infrared sort of goes ballistic with all sorts of different colours. So on the tower, I think that's the Deutsche Bank building, and it's got that aluminium panel on the outside. So just the sheen that you get. So the subtlety that we were getting in the tea tree bush in the morning is the same sort of subtle sheen that you can see running through all the aluminium panel cladding on the outside of the building. So nothing's burnt out. You've got all the detail in the fine lines and the panel joins all the way through. And then you get this other effect of a bit like our first image with the fig tree up on Observatory Hill, where you get that lovely detail where what's usually dark green and quite blocked out in the shadows, you then get all this fantastic detail in these heads of these cabbage tree palms. So you got that lovely combination of the cabbage tree palm, the detail, plus the sheen in the surface of the building. But you got to look for that, all right? So you got to actually be hunting around in the viewfinder to find where that is. So it's not the sort of thing where you just sort of say, well, that's the composition I'm going to go. I might have to walk 5 paces to the left, swing around 3 or 4 degrees just to get the sheen happening. So you're actually hunting the light. So it's quite an engaging process because it's not as simple as finding the composition, taking the shot. You're actually engaging with what the light is doing in the subject as you pan around. These are another couple where the one on the right was kind of interesting because this is what the infrared's doing. So this is first thing in the morning, and the water is absorbing So because it's the blue, it's the heat sink. So all the red sort of gets sucked into the water, so it ends up going black. So what a lovely turquoise pools around these couple of rocks end up in infrared going quite a different effect, because it accentuates the sort of sheeting light running across the sand. It darkens the water, gives you these dark bands of ocean, and then you team that up with a bit of long exposure, and you've got a bit of everything, haven't you? So I probably should have taken out those people's footprints that go right through the middle. I've only noticed that there, but anyway, it's a tool that just enables you to look at normal stuff quite differently, and by doing that, it then enables you, when you're doing your normal photography, to look at things in an unusual way, because you're not necessarily hunting it out just as you would normally for a composition, but you'll be after you've done it a bit, you can actually see the infrared light in the visible spectrum, where you get the sheen, and you can see what things would be doing interesting things if they were in infrared, and you actually find that that's also an interesting image in the visible spectrum, not only infrared. And this shot up at Murrumarang on the left there, this is it's the last light of the day, and we just happen to be at the right spot, and you can see as the sky's losing the light, it goes jet black up at the azimuth, and then the tree is just sort of beautifully highlighted in all its detail. A little bit of motion blur there, and because it was a windy afternoon, so the shutter speed probably wasn't fast enough, so there's a little bit of motion blur in the foliage at the bottom, but the tree itself is pretty sharp, but really interesting effect. So that image there I can then take into Photoshop. I can play around with the blue, so if I wanted to change the tones in the blue, at least I've got something to start with, but the rest of the image is kind of in the black and white, giving that almost like a turquoise sky. And this is the classic shot I think I've ever taken of the subtlety of light into the coastal bush. You just look at the how luscious all that detail is, and what you can capture in an infrared shot, which is you just can't do it in a visible light shot and convert it to black and white. It just doesn't have the detail, doesn't have the subtlety, doesn't have those shades in the shadows. So it's a lovely little isolated pathway down near Bermagui, and the morning light washing through. So that was a bit in the landscape, and there was one little city shot there, but the city's a fantastic place to play games with the infrared, and I did mention those coatings that you get on the glass in the office towers, and you can see the kind of effect that you're getting. That's the number 1 Phillip Street, what used to be the State Office Block, which they redeveloped. So you got that, the really harsh geometry, and then you've got the subtle, the foreground of the foliage, but the foliage has gone white, and the glass panels they're showing off that mauve sort of tint. So yeah, it's a real change to how we see things normally, and there again, just the subtle gradients that you get. So this sky on the right hand side is a perfectly blue sky, and you've got that lovely gradient from top to bottom, and in this instance it's in reverse, all right, because the sun's actually it'll be about this is one where the sun's up around about midday, and so the sun at the top is causing the white of the glow, and it's getting darker as it goes down further to the horizon. And then just look at the effect that the infrared then has on the buildings and the shadows, and how the shadows aren't black, and they've still got all the subtlety of detail in there. So lovely composing tool. Yep, wrong way. You can then have games with your infrared. So this was a set I put together for Australian Photography magazine. I put this in for an art portfolio, and these are all infrared shots. And I've had different levels of playing around with them, and essentially they formed a set which talked about what the city was like. All right. And the one on the left was talking about the facade of an office building or a high-rise residential building, how impersonal they are and how out of place the person is in that sort of environment. And the one on the right talks about the canyon in the city and the light beaming down through the canyon and finding the person on the ground at the very bottom, and what the infrared has picked up in both of those is the mullions of the glass in the facades. And on the left-hand one, I've used a vertical motion blur, which when you do the vertical motion blur, it gets rid of the horizontal mullions, so all it does is emphasise the vertical ones. And then in the one on the right, I've done a combination where I've done a motion blur at a diagonal to emphasise the diagonal mullions, and then a vertical motion blur just to give the guy a bit of jitter down at the bottom and add to his sort of the abstract quality of it. And the one in the middle is a play on the word skyscraper. All right, so it was scraping the sky, so its needle went through one of the clouds. So that's how high it was. So and the three of those work together, but they're all infrared shots, and they're all then played with in Photoshop to then bring out the different qualities. But the quality that you're able to bring out is the light. All right, so that the light on the building stays the same on the left-hand shot and on the right-hand shot, because it's the quality of the light in those conditions, and all I've done is emphasise the quality of the light in the way I've processed the images. The one in the middle, looking at that time of day, the sky was almost black because of the direction, and then the building itself is picking up all the reflection of the light, so that's what that gives it that lovely dark background for just the detail of the lightness of the building. Wrong way. And you can do this sort of thing, which will appeal to Terry Daly, because then you can do, you can hold the camera and you can move it around, and you do motion blur in infrared, which is kind of cool, because then you're getting the effect of the light, because this was taken on late afternoon on New Year's Eve, I think it's 2018, and we got access to one of the buildings along Macquarie Street there, and that's a sea of people in the foreground waiting for the fireworks later that night. And this is just as the sun's going down, so you've got that effect of what the infrared will do, where the light's just absorbed into the water of Circular Quay, goes pitch black, and the same with the sky on the right. It's sunset's coming, so it's pitching down black. So the sails of the Opera House are reflecting the infrared, and you're getting a little bit of the shadowing coming through the harbour bridge there. So you've got all the makings of a nice dramatic shot before you even start, and then you add a bit of motion blurred or a bit of double exposure to it, and it's all happening. So lots of fun. And some of you will recognise.
Very soft.
What's that? You just dropped in and out there, Rob.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. There you go. Just wondered how many shots in that last one.
We'll just go back. You were just muted there for a minute, Rob.
I know.
So if you look at the arch of the Opera House, of the bridge, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so there's 4. I actually I held it's all in camera, and there's probably about 20 of these, and I was actually I think I went for like a 1 second exposure, and I actually moved the camera during the 1 second. All right, so I moved it in four different spots. All right, so then that's all in camera. So that's not done later. That's all playing around with moving the camera around to actually get the effect whilst the long exposure is happening. So you'll hold your camera in one spot, move it a little bit, move it a little bit, move it a little bit, and your second's over. So it's just a bit of trial and error and playing around with what might work, what won't work. But as I say, I think there's about 20 or more goes to get that one. But it was a bit of fun. New Year's Eve, what else you got to do?
It's a great effect.
But well, there's two things going there, aren't there? That one's the multiple exposure, but then the second one is actually the light. And it would not be the image it is without the light effect. So it's the infrared's just given it that zing. You could process the image like that. You could process it by the darks and the lights, but this is actually this is pretty close to straight out of camera, and all I've really done is darken the top right, darken the bottom left, and brighten the middle a bit, and that's all I've done in post-processing. But that's pretty close to straight out of camera. Some of you will recognise Robin's favourite plug-in here. So this is a combination of infrared shot with flood to turn the harbour into Mercury. So isn't that cool? So we've got the accentuated ripple effect in the middle, and we've got that perfect mirror, and you've got the dark sky, and you can see where you got the effect with the where some things look kind of normal, but other things aren't, because you see all the foliage is going white. So it just gives that twist on reality, and then gives you that added little bit of interest. So much brighter image. So that's a bit of fun. Going the wrong way again. And then so these previous ones were using the 850. So that's an 850 nanometer shot. So that's the nice crispy black and white. I have a suspicion that this was with the 590 with Robbins, and these and the one on the left. I think with the 850 nanometer, I'm not meant to get any colour at all, but I get the occasional tinge of blue and mauve in my shots, which when I've had people have a look at the sensor, and I've got a hot sensor. One of the little sensors is a hot sensor, and it's giving a little bit of a color aberration to the rest of the image. So I've got a happy circumstance where I've got a black and white 850 nanometer sensor, which gives the occasional blue haze to the shots every now and again, which is kind of cool every now and again. But if you're wanting completely black and white, then it might drive you nuts. Okay, so colour in the landscape. So this is using the 590 nanometer, and still retaining a little bit of colour, or mucking around with the colour in the image. All right, so one on the right are those two lonely trees on the hill driving into tea gardens, which do a fantastic job of posing for you on the way in. And you either like the little one on its own on the left, or you like the tree on its own on the right, or you have father and son or something, or so you can muck around with the editing of it. But you can leave a little bit of colour in, or you can change the colourway. Image on the top left is kind of the traditional film infrared look, where the foliage used to be red and the sky was this dark blue, and then everything else was white. So it was an effect that Kodak had with one of their infrared films, and I was able to replicate that by doing selective colouring. All right, so because it leaves a little bit of colour in, you can then change the colour of what it's left selectively, using the masking to then start playing around with the colours and the effects. So bottom left, if you kind of like those taupey colours with a bit of blue thrown in, doing the sort of French grey kind of kind of feel, then you can leave a little bit of colour in to just take the edge off the black and white. Or you can choose then what you want to do with those colours. So with the taupey brown in the sky, I can selectively change the tone of that, and I can blend that in, soften it off. So you've got the ability to then start playing with the colour composition as well as the graphic that you've put together in the image. So as I say, if you like the idea of having a little bit of colour, then the 590 nanometer still enables you to end up with a black and white. It's not as crisp and as sharp and as punchy as the 850, but it's pretty close, and it still enables you to have a bit of a play with the colours in the infrared whilst you're doing the processing. And then this one's pretty cool. This was I borrowed Robin's camera for this one as well. This is Victoria Pass, up on the western end of the Blue Mountains, up near Mount Victoria, heading down to the plains on the other side. And this is the sort of thing that you can do with controlling the colour, but also what the light does is it's washing through. So a bit like the black and white images in the bush on the coastline, you can still see all the subtlety of shadow that you're getting. So even with the 590, it gets a little bit blocked out at times, but it still has that lovely detail of just what the light's doing as it's washing through. And I've got then the ability, when I'm processing the image, as to what colourway I want to take that. So that sort of mauvey blue, I can change the tones of that. The gold of the sandstone I can change. So it's just a matter of then playing around with what colourway and what direction you want to take it visually. The other thing you can do, which you wouldn't think you can do, is use the infrared at night time. So this shot was taken on a full moon at Taking Point Lighthouse, and the full moon, if you think about it, the sun being the source of the light, there's enough infrared reflected off the moon to then come into play for use by the camera and its sensor. So you can see the light coming off Taking Point, so it's actually doing its beam. You can see the stars, and all the light in the image is all moonlight. But one of those really bright nights where you could sit and read a book under the moonlight, one of those ones where it was a really full moon, and we just happened to be up there on the full moon, and I saw what it was going to do, and I thought to myself, well, let's give it a go and see what happens, and this is what happened. So it's probably a 5 second exposure, and so you could see the blur on the water. It's enough to capture the swing of the light, but it's also enough just to get a little bit of motion blur in the clouds as well. So if I wanted to, I could have gone the long exposure and had the blur of the clouds and done a bit, but it's a thing that you wouldn't think of doing regularly, but it could. I think the more I play with it, the more interesting things you can do with it. So you can imagine a long motion blurred sky with this as well, and then having a little bit of the detail of the stars. So they do use infrared for star photography because it's being a different spectrum. You get to see different things. So the astronomy world's been using infrared, ultraviolet, all sorts of manners of X-rays and other things for looking into space. But you can see here that it's still able to be used for. It's got a lovely quality of light about it. It's just got that softness and a little bit of an eerie sort of softness about it. So. And these two also are nighttime shots. The one on the right, I just happened to have. I was actually down there shooting the stars over Bombo on the one on the right, and I just happened to have my infrared camera in the bag, but it didn't have bracket on the bottom of it to use on the tripod. So I just sat it on the rock that was next to me, so you can see that there's a little bit of motion blur. It's a little bit soft on the rocks at the bottom. But I think what this demonstrates, as with the other ones, with the shadows into the bush, is the subtlety of the gradient. So just the extent of the gradient running from the moon out into the sky, and that is a straight out of camera shot. So there's nothing done to that. There again, just the subtlety of infrared. So it doesn't drop off. It doesn't seem to drop off as quickly as visible light. So you just get much more time between the 2 points across the image. And the one on the left is down at Kangaroo Island. So that was on a pretty dark night, and I've exposed it a bit long because you can see there's a little bit of star movement. So to actually get the shot. There was a very soft moon, so all of the light that's on the tree and on the grass is moonlight, and so all the light there is from the moon. But I've had to expose probably about 30 seconds, I think, for that one, because you can see the stars. There's a bit of star trail happening, so I've exposed it a bit long for the stars, but it's enough for the foreground. So I suppose in hindsight, probably what I should have done is do one for the stars and one for the foreground, then blend the two. But that's a single shot straight out of the camera. All right, so I've got a couple of images if you're interested in seeing them. We've got a few questions here. We've got 16 of them. Anything I need to be attending to, Robin?
No. So Kevin was just asking what was the cost of a conversion. I thought it was around about 800, wasn't it?
Yeah, not that much. So I think it's about 400, 450, somewhere there.
But if you provide the camera, but if you don't provide the camera,
that's right. So with Kalari, they've got 2 ways you can do it. So you can either ship your camera there, they'll do the conversion, ship the camera back, or you can actually buy a camera. All right. So
I sent the link through the Kalari.
Yeah. So instead of, in my case, I was looking at the Sony A7R at that time. This is back a few years because you can't buy that camera anymore. And rather than buying the camera here and then sending it to the States, having it converted and shipping it back, they would actually sell me the camera at a better price than I could buy it here, then do the conversion. So by the time the conversion was done, I think it was about the same price as buying the camera here. And I think sending it there is $100 or something, because you've got to package it up, you've got to do the insurance, you've got to do everything else. So you've got the 2 options of either sending a camera there or buying one from them and then shipping it here. The other thing which you might be asking is what camera should I, if I was going to do it, what would be a good camera to do it on? And there again, Kalari have a whole page on that on their website about what cameras are the best cameras. And I think the long and short of it is if you have a DSLR which has got live view, that's probably the sweet spot, all right, because the DSLR just seems to handle the lenses that go with the DSLR seem to handle the infrared a little bit better, but the problem with the DSLR is because it's got it's got the metering through the lens, and it's got 2 meterings, and as long as it's got live view, then what you're seeing through live view is what you are seeing off the metering off the lens, which is what you want to see. Anyway, read the article. It's a great little article. Tells you all about the difference between a point and shoot DSLR and the latest mirrorless. So, but they're lots of fun. Anything else we've missed in there?
No. Liz was asking about a Canon 40D, wonder if she could convert that, but neither of us are Canon people, Liz.
That's right. You can convert any camera. So any camera can be converted. It's more a matter of the effect that you Yeah. So what you would do is, if the 40D is the one that's sitting on the shelf and you'd like to get it done, the guys at Kalari Vision are really helpful, and you would email them and you'd say, I've got a Canon 40D, I'm thinking of converting it, what are the pros and cons? And they'll tell you whether other people have had them converted, what their experience is. So they've got a great kind of after sales or knowledge base that they're happy to share. So they're not just out for the sale. They're there to encourage the infrared community. They've got their own page on Instagram, and they follow people who do infrared photography, and they show people what they do and all the rest of it. So they're actually passionate about their infrared photography. So they're more than happy to help you in your decision making. So Kevin's saying, would you start with a filter or go straight for a conversion? The problem you're going to have with the filter is that it's going to be like the old school where you've got to put on quite a dark filter, and you won't be able to see through. If it's mirrorless, it won't be a problem because you're actually you're going live view, but you'll have a problem composing because of the darkness of it, and because of the darkness of it, you're going to have to put it on a tripod, and you'll have to do longer exposures. Whereas if you modify the sensor, then it's all handheld at the same speeds that you're currently shooting at. Whereas to get the effect of blocking the visible light, you've got to put quite a dark filter on there to block the visible, to let the infrared through. So that then affects your exposure times and also what you can see through the camera. So you can buy filters, that aren't much, but the problem is your exposure time. So you're going to end up with long exposure shots, not the short, sharp sort of shutter speeds that we're used to dealing with handheld. All right, so let's stop sharing that one, and I shall open. That you, Robin, listening to the block in the background?
No, absolutely.
Who's listening to the block in the background?
Maybe. Oh, it's
busted. All right, so let's have
multitasking.
Let's have a look at Victoria Pass. I'll just open that up and share the screen. We want that one, I think.
Kevin's saying, would you recommend starting with a filter or go straight to a conversion?
Oh, that's where I was just...
so we would, yep, that's right.
No, you'd go for a conversion.
Yeah.
It's more a matter of which camera you would convert. So the first one we used was a little Sony RX100 point and shoot. So not an expensive camera, not an expensive conversion. So you could play around with that. We then got hooked and then went for the full frame versions. So can you see my? I probably need to change the sharing here to the window, not just the. Let me cancel this for a second. I'll share the window so then you can see everything that's happening. Okay, so what do we need to open here? We need to go in here. We need to open Victoria Pass. All right, so you can all see a lovely pink and orange image. Yes?
Yes.
Yes? Okay.
Yes.
All right, so this is straight out. This is what you get out of the camera. All right, so what you've got to do is do a customized white balance, which sets what the white point is in the camera. Kalari will do that for you, or what you do is you take a picture of green grass and green grass is white for all intents and purposes because you saw the effect of what happens with green foliage, it goes white. So green grass is, instead of using grayscale boards and everything else, you take a picture of the green grass, you tell the camera that the green grass is white, and then it does an auto white balance based on green grass being white. All right? The other way is you can, which again what Kalari does, which I'll show you, it gives you a series of actions you can use in Photoshop. It also gives you ways of calibrating the sensor, so what you're seeing is through your live view is what you're going to see out of the camera. So we've set up live view on Robin's camera, which is the Alpha 6000, the Sony Alpha 6000, and this is what you actually see through live view. So as you move it around, you'll see what's bright, what's dark, what's burning out. So you see the highlights in the clouds, they're kind of burning out, but the light in the foliage is good down as it's washing through the pass. So this is probably about, this is a winter's afternoon, so it's probably about 3 o'clock on a winter's afternoon, just with the light starting to peak between the clouds and cast its way down between the pass. All right, so it opens in Camera Raw, and I don't do anything with it in Camera Raw but to open it, because we've actually got some actions in Photoshop from Kalari which do things to it. So we'll open it up. And under my Actions panel, which we'll see down here, so these are little actions down here, false colours from Kalari Vision. All right, and these they provide. So depending on what filter you've got, depends what you'll use and also what effects you'll get. So let me just, I'll move that out of the way. Let's just copy the background, and then we'll have a bit of a play and I'll show you the difference. So this option here, channel swap and only the blue color. So if I run that action, what it does, as you can see, is it essentially turns what was the mauve colours into greys, black and whites, and then the orange, it does a blue and red channel swap, and what was orange ends up becoming blues. All right. So the false colour is, what false colour refers to is that it turns the sky blue. All right, that's the false colour action. All right? So that is one effect. So let's turn that one off, and we'll do Control J and do another one. There's also the standard IR channel swap, which is just red and blue channel swap. All right. So essentially, what it will do is that you can do it manually. When you have a look at this image, blue will be 0 and red will be 100, and you reverse that. So you make blue 100 and red 0, and it's actually literally swapping the red and the blue channels. And if I run that, you can see that it's kept the mauve in the foliage, but it's also done the blue of the sky. All right. So let's say that's kind of cool, and we start with that. One of the things that I find in a lot of infrared is that the skies are really distracting. So because of the blotchiness of the sky, it'd be nice if it was a nice plain sky, but where you get that brightness of the sky coming and going is just, it drives me nuts. And I tend to either shoot on a day when there's no cloud, or it's got wispy cloud, or it's got something happening with the cloud. But if it's just a normal cloudy pattern day, it's just like looking in shadows in the bush where you just can't make out the detail, and it's quite distracting. So the strength of this image, I think, is the light coming through the pass, and I think that's what the story is about. And this sort of speckledy zebra sky is really annoying. So what I will do is I will crop that out. All right. So I will put my area. Well, I'll just. I'm going to do stretch this out of action. All right. So I'm actually going to. I think if we get rid of the sky here, you can see that immediately by getting rid of the sky, we can concentrate on what the light's doing through the pass and not be worried about the dappling that's going on. All right? So if I was to do something like that, if I compare sort of the before and after the stretch, you can see where just getting rid of that sky just enables you the eye to rest on what the light's doing, rather than being distracted by all the carry on. And then I can do an auto curves. All right, so let's come in here and we'll go to curves, auto, see what that does. You can see where it's starting to burn out the highlights, so it's probably a little bit too much. But if I do go to my Alt, press the Alt button and I click the auto again, and I go to my second set of algorithms here, and I can play around with what these algorithms are going to do. You can see I'm starting to get some interesting things happening with dark and light, and also with per channel. So maybe we go, what do you reckon? Maybe we go the bronzy colour or a bit of the pinky colour. Let's go the pink colour for Robin's benefit. She'll like the pink, I think. So let's start with that one. So if I compare the before and after, we've brightened the image a bit and we've changed the colourway a little bit. All right? So it's at this point where I might take it back into Camera Raw. So I'll do the Control Alt Shift E. I'll go back up into the filter, Camera Raw, and this is where I can bring out the shadows. All right, so if I brighten the shadows, and those bits that are starting to burn out, I can just knock back those highlights a little bit. And texture is something that, because it's infrared, tends to be a little bit soft. Adding a bit of texture will just sharpen up the foliage, which is looking a little bit soft. All right, so let's click OK for that, and we'll brighten up the image like that. And then I can, because I've got essentially red and blue, I can change the tonings in the image of the blue, and I can change the tonings of the reds. All right, so if I come here and I go Hue Saturation, and without selecting anything in particular, if I just change the hues, you can see what happens to the image as I roll through. So if I roll down to the red end, the sandstone goes back to about the colour of the sandstone, but I've got green foliage. And as I roll through, I've got some, this is like Avatar, isn't it? Where we've got some Avatar. Look at that. That's straight out of Avatar. Beautiful. All right. And as you roll across, you can then choose. So each of these effects, we could then selectively choose to brush in, just depending on what takes your fancy. Yeah. So if you then want to go back to this kind of effect where you've got sort of the tropical green foliage and the brown or whatever. So having had a bit of a play with that, we then bring that back to 0. I can come into Channel Mixer. I'm going to do a mask by colour. All right, so I come up to, click on the Channel Mixer here. I go to Colour Range, click on Colour Range. I'm going to use my little picker here, and I'm going to pick this blue, and then I've got to increase its range and increase its fuzziness. All right. So I'm going to have to pick a few spots. So then click the plus one, and if I come around here, I can we'll reduce the range a bit. I can reduce my fuzziness a bit. You can see where I'm now kind of getting a selection which is roughly where the blue of the hills are. So I did the wrong one there. I should have had a plus. Let's keep on going here. We'll go back to where we were. So we'll just sample a few of these blues. All right, so we'll take that, and then I'll do a Hue and Saturation, and I'll put that mask in the Hue and Saturation, and then I'll go back to my Hue and Saturation, and we'll try doing the same thing. And you'll see now where it's only applying to the blue that I selected. all right? So I can then play around with the colours of the blues, all right? So I might find that I find something somewhere, and I'll brush a little bit of that in. So let's go ballistic here. We'll go out of the, seeing it's a Tuesday night. Let's say we select something like that, and on the mask, I don't want the effect in the distance, all right? So I will come along and I'll choose myself a brush to get this thing out of the way. I want myself a black brush. I'm going to brush out the effect in the distance here. All right, so I don't want it in the distance there, but I just want these really weird and wonderful colours on the rocks in the foreground. Something a little bit like that, and then we might have another go at some hue and saturation, and we might pick some of these pinks in here, and I can either saturate or desaturate. So let's desaturate them a little bit. All right, and then I can do a brightness and contrast adjustment. I can brighten up the shadows a little bit here, add a little bit of contrast. And I can make a white one, so I can brush in a little bit more detail in the shadows here. Blue's getting a little bit strong, so why don't we desaturate the blue in the background. I'll come up here with the picker, choose that blue up there, drop the blue out in the background, drop the little bit of green, maybe drop the strength of that a bit. So now we're getting a little, coming back to the subtlety by just working with the desaturation. I then might do my brightness and contrast. So I might, we want to maybe darken off the edges. So I will darken the distance so that we're concentrating on the light that's coming through the pass. Have a little bit more of a go in the background there. We can, if we get rid of that, we're not using that. So if I stamp all those layers up, Control Shift E, put them all in the top one. If I do my image, apply image, sort of crunch it right up, and then if I do it just in the red zone, and I press OK with that, and I reduce the opacity a little bit, and then I put a mask on it, invert it, Control I, and then I can brush a little bit more of that darkness into the background to drop the background even further away. So something like that. And then the last little thing, which are a little bit distracting on the horizon there, is I'll just get rid of those little light spots so that the sky is nice and plain in the distance. darken those back there. All right, so we've got something pretty cool. It's got the effect of the light and the like, but depending on how cool you want it to be, you can play around with the saturation of it. All right, so if you just want a very subtle wash of colour, you can then knock it back to maybe something like that. So you've just got that little soft bit of pink coming through on the landscape, and then it's more of a grey landscape with a touch of highlights. Or there again, you can play with the hue again. You can burn it off a bit. You make it a little bit more orange if you don't want the pinks, or you can turn it into the, sort of the greens and the browns, because the effect of the light you can see changes. So falling on the green foliage as opposed to falling on the coloured foliage gives you a different effect as you roll through there. So the other thing you can do is blend the two. All right, so if you like a little bit of the green, so we might take it to there, say, and then I invert that, and I can go B for brush, and I can just brush in a little bit of that this golden light coming through on the pink foliage. So you can see it really becomes a whole different creative exercise to working in normal light, because you can basically take the image wherever you want to take it, and you can play around with the different effects of what the light is doing and what the colours are doing as much as you like. So whole different kind of world, isn't it? So it's a whole different approach. It becomes quite different to how you might look at a normal image. So let's have a quick look at Binalong Bay, because this is just with the monochrome. This is the black and white, the 850 nanometers. So there again, I won't do anything to it at this stage, or the only thing I might do is maybe knock back the highlights, because the highlight's a bit bright in the sky there. So let's knock back the highlights a little bit. Maybe lift the shadows a touch, and we might crank up a little bit on the texture just to give a little bit more detail in the rocks in the foreground. So maybe we'll do that before we start. All right, we click OK. So I will come along here and I shall run my Kalari action. So I can do the standard channel swap, which comes in the modes. If I then do the other one, it'll then take it to the greys. So there we go. All right, so let's X all that. Let's do that again. I should have made a copy of the background before I did. Let's start with I'll do what we did before. Let's remembered what the settings I had. Let's brought it in and done those, so we'll open that. Okay, so we'll just do a Control J, copy that. So if I do the standard swap only blue, it gives me that. If I do copy the background one, not that one. If I do the standard IR swap, there's not much difference, is there? So between that, or that, this first one's probably a little bit more luminous, so I might go with it. So what I can do with it is you can keep on playing with these and it'll end up giving you black and white. All right, so the 590 to 720. I've got to be on the right one, select that, let's have another go. There we go. Right, so it's the 590 nanometer to the 665. So that gets us pretty close to black and white, which we can then play around with the tonings and the like in there. So let's choose that one. I'll then try an auto curves on it. I shall do the shift. See what it does here. There we go. Lights and darks. You can see it's now got rid of that mauve toning and it's producing some nice glow in the sky, and it's starting to come together a little bit there. I then might go to, let's do another curves adjustment. Let's drag down the darks a little bit. And we'll brighten up the lights a bit, just a little bit of contrast. I shall stamp it up, Control-Alt-Shift-E, and then I'll go back into Camera Raw now I've got it to this stage. The main reason to go back into Camera Raw is to usually deal with the shadows. So at this stage the shadows are starting to block up a bit, so if I brighten the shadows a little bit, and I knock back the highlights on the sky again a little bit, and if I then crank up that texture a touch for the rocks, a little bit of clarity to increase the brightness there, and just a touch of dehaze to start the sky heading off in the direction we want it to go. So maybe somewhere there. So that you can see that that's sort of, if I turn that on and off, you can see there it's just raised the detail in the foreground, given a little bit more texture on the rocks in the foreground. And the effect is really just applying to this bottom right-hand corner there on the image, but it hasn't really affected the contrast of the tree against the sky there yet. Right. So at this stage, what I will do is just make a copy of that so I don't destroy that with some future work. We'll go up to here, Image, Apply Image, and you can see the lovely effect that that gives to the sky up on the top left-hand side. It crunches up and really increases the silhouette of the tree. And there again, if I go from RGB to just red, I've now got it in kind of a black and white toning. So this is looking pretty cool up the top there. So I've actually got the ability to either leave it like that and brush out the effect I don't want, or put it on and brush it in. So in this instance, we might brush it in. So I will put on a layer mask, do a Control Invert, and one of the earlier presentations we did, we showed you how to use the gradient tool. So if I click on the gradient tool rather than the brush, I've got a black mask, I want a white brush, and if I click and hold down and I drag the gradient, you get a lovely smooth gradient line, and I can probably do the same in the bottom. That's probably a bit too much, we won't put it down there, but it's kind of done a nice job in the sky there, I think. So that's just a matter of really working the dodging and burning. So then we might come along and do a brightness layer here for a bit, just to increase the contrast around the tree. I'll invert that, B for brush, give myself a nice big brush, white brush on a black background, and I'll just maybe just dab a little bit in here just to bring up the clouds and bring up the contrast against the rocks there. Maybe a little bit of brightness in the rocks in the foreground. All right, so that's kind of getting us to somewhere we want to be, I think. So just looking at the image, I think this little cloud here is a little distracting, and it'd be nice if it was a nice clean gradient sky across to there. So let's have a go at deleting it. So we'll stamp up everything that we've got there. We'll come up here with the lasso tool. Let's see what we can do with, what Photoshop will do for me here. So let's highlight it with the lasso tool. Oop, missed a bit. And then if I right click and go fill, content aware fill, it should hopefully pick the light layers around. Yeah, well, it hasn't done a bad job. Control D, it's got it to the point where I can get rid of it myself now. So get myself a new layer, get my removal tool, come along here, clink, and we're done. All right. So I think you'll agree that it's probably neater without it. All right. And I think we're pretty close there. So the other thing we might do is just have a look at what the levels is looking like. So at the moment with the histogram, the whites are pretty much on the edge, but the blacks are in a bit, so I can afford to bring the black slider in a bit, which is just sort of crunches up the contrast a little bit. And I could have a go at bringing in the lights and see what that does. But yeah, so that's all right. So bringing in the lights and the darks a bit just helps to punch the image out a little bit. But it's still a little bit flat in the middle. So one of the little techniques we tried early on was with the this quick selection tool. So if I come along in here and I just select a few of the faces of some of these rocks here, maybe even this one here, and maybe that one. That's probably enough. Oh, maybe this one here. That's where the light's falling. All right, and then I put those into a brightness and contrast layer. You can see it's created the mask there with just those little bits of the rocks. Then I can selectively just brighten those few rocks there in the foreground there, just to bring up the interest in the around the base of the tree, just to brighten it a bit. And here where it's blended in a bit, then we just need to brush that back. So we'll come in here, select the black brush, and then we'll just brush out the effect a little bit, just to soften it in on those edges there. Right, but you can see the effect there, where that's just gone from being a little bit flat to giving a little bit more light around the centre of the image there. I think that's probably about all we need to do. What do you reckon, Rick? Is that enough to do, or we leave it? We need to do some more. So the only other thing we might do. So let's stamp it all up. And if I do Control L, it's a shortcut for the layers. Up in here, if you remember, we've got a up where it says default, we've got the option of doing some things. So we can choose lighter, and lighter just lightens the whole image. So if I turn that on and off, you can see that that's probably helped from being flat to just brighten it up a little bit. And I think that's probably where we go. So that's how you get the infrared version across to. It's still got some mauve toning, so if you want to have it perfectly black and white, you can either go to Hue and Saturation and desaturate the whole thing, or if you just want to have that slight touch of mauve on it, then even if we desaturated it to about that, just so it's not so hard black and white, probably loses a bit of the subtlety to it. So if we ease off a touch and just leave a little bit of the toning in it, then I think that's just a bit softer on the greys. So we're at about minus 35 or something. So somewhere there where we've got just that nice little play. So if we go F for full screen, there we go. So that's the Binalong tree, no longer with us. Infrared photography, isn't it fun? You can go nuts with all the colours and things, can't you? Or you can just that's why I tended to steer clear. I just went for straight black and white because I think it's got a subtlety about normal black and white photography where you can get all those lovely details in the shadows, which I think are fantastic. And I think some of those early morning ones you saw where you've just got that full gradient of greys between the black and the white, that's just magic. And then if you want to go, lollipop and play around with the colours, it's got that as an option for you too. So all sorts of manners of different ways of seeing the world. What do you reckon, Susan? You're muted.
I'm unmuted now. I was just writing that I thought that it was a great topic and well covered, but I'm not doing a critiquing, so I'll just say many thanks.
But I think it's just another thing to have in your arsenal where it's a bit of fun. And
Yeah.
I think when you play with something different like this, it informs your other work, all right? Because you then look at the world differently. You look at what the light's doing. You look at the options for different ways of processing, and it just takes the blinkers off, because it gives you an ability to then take what you've learnt from this little bit of play back into your normal work and interrogate it in a different way.
I think it does something for the viewer as well, Tim, in that it can be eye-opening. And once you catch people's interest, then they can explore further. Particularly with the color infrared, I find that particularly fascinating.
Yep.
And I think it's a great way to interest people in different forms of photography beyond the standard landscape or seascape.
Yeah, but also light, because we're chasing the light,
Yeah.
and by showing light in a different way, immediately it has a wow factor, because it's not a way that you've seen light before, but light is still the subject, all right? And you've been able to capture people's attention by showing it to them in quite a different way, which has then got that, as I say, it gives it that wow factor.
Yeah, I agree.
Kerry's saying, Tim, why were the leaves on the Binnalong tree black rather than white?
The angle. I'm not sure if you saw early on. So depending what angle you shot the trees at depends on the reflection. It's a bit like, in some ways, the clue is a bit like how when you spin your polarizer, where the water goes from shiny to dark to being able to see through it. All right. So depending on which way you point your camera, it will go from being quite shiny to dark. All right. And it's only within a few degrees of view, and it's kind of the fun, as just like experimenting with your polarizer, what your polarizer will do. This is the whole camera itself. It's not just the polarizer. And as you move around in the scene, things will glow, things will drop off black, things will glisten and sheen, and things which weren't interesting become interesting. So it's quite an interesting process, just looking through the viewfinder and seeing what the world around you is doing under a different spectrum. So. You're all stunned, all rushing out. Bulk order at Kalari Vision.
Thanks, Tim. That was great.
But yeah, I'll track down the details of the guys in Melbourne. I've heard of a couple of people getting the conversions done in Melbourne, but I think it's just all the best place to start. I think if you're interested is go to that Kalari Vision website. And there's so much information there, everything that you want to know about infrared. They'll talk about the cameras, they'll talk about which lenses, hotspots. So they've gone and tested lenses off different kits. They've got Nikon lenses, Canon lenses, Sony lenses, Sigma lenses, and they've tested them all for hotspotting. So there's there's a whole body of information that's all there. And it's just a matter of simplifying that, and they help you go through that process. So they've got a whole little section there about what filter should I choose and why should I choose it, what camera should I use and what's the pros and cons of changing it. So it takes all the guesswork out of it, and it's all very informative and very helpful website. So they've also got lots of examples. Let me just have a look for their Instagram page, because that would be an interesting little feed as well. So let me find that for you. And I'll put the link in the searched in the wrong spot. Let's go back.
Which nanometer range would you suggest to start with, Tim?
Well, it depends what you want to do. All right, so let me just copy that and I'll put it down here.
I liked the color, Kevin, but also the black and white. When I put the IR black and white against black and white conversions on my ordinary camera, converting them to black and white there, it was like chalk and cheese, really. So the IR pure blacks and whites is really beautiful, really, really beautiful.
Which you saw the subtleties in the shadows, right? So instead of having a harsh shadow, you can eke out a beautiful gradient with all the details and all the subtlety. And it's just like a pencil drawing, like a Lloyd Rees pencil drawing. It's just fantastic. If you're someone who thinks that black and white is it for photography and that's the pure real photography and colour's a distraction, then you go the 850 nanometers, all right, because it will give you the most beautiful black and whites. You'll be able to do your max Q pane. You'll be able to produce all those, sunrise over wherever that Ansel Adams did. So all those ones where you either can spend a lot of time in Photoshop dodging and burning and achieving all sorts of effects, or if you go down the infrared route, it produces an image which then you're 90% there to creating something interesting just from straight out of camera, and then you can take it somewhere else. All right, so you can imagine some of those fantastic high contrast black and whites of Ansel Adams if the foliage was white. Imagine what those landscapes would look like. Be pretty cool, wouldn't it? So there's so much to play with, and I think the one to probably consider at the moment is that they now offer a full spectrum conversion, and then you put filters on as well. All right, but you can still do it handheld. So that was the third example where they take off the infrared blocker, the visible light blocker, and the UV blocker, and everything goes to the sensor. And then you put a series of filters on depending on what you want to block. All right, but you're then able to shoot. So you're then able to shoot at 850, or you can shoot at 590, or you can shoot at 665 by the filters that you put on. All right, so it gives you more flexibility. So when Robin and I did the conversions on our cameras, that wasn't around. So it's now even more flexible, where you could get a 590 nanometer conversion, and then you can get a filter to put on your lens, which takes it from 590 to 850. All right. So if you want the best of both worlds, you would probably do the 590 and then play with filters on it between there and 850. So you've got the ability to do both. All right. So just the flexibility. But if you do the full spectrum conversion, it means that you can still shoot in normal visible light. All right, you can put a filter on and you shoot normally, or put another filter on, you go IR, put another filter on, you can go, So the full spectrum one gives you the whole lot. So if you only want one camera to do everything, then you could actually, if you're happy to muck around with filters, then you can get everything in one full spectrum conversion.
Tim, if you were doing it again, would you do that now?
Probably, but having said that, I'm really happy with the black and whites, all right, because I'm a little bit of colour is fun to play with, and I've got the anomaly where I've got a dud pixel which is blowing a blue haze through my black and white photo, so I can choose to have a little bit of colour in it, but rather than the whole black and white. But I really love just the black and whites. I think they're just magical. So even that last shot that we had there of the Binalong tree, even shooting at 850 nanometers, it comes through as mauve, which means when you do the toning, instead of a harsh black and white, you can leave a little bit of the blue mauve toning in it, and it just gives all that softness to the image, which I think is where that's what I love. I just love the soft gradients, and and I suppose I've got, every now and again I break out and I borrow Robin's camera and do the colour ones, but most of the time it's black and white. So it's horses for courses, what you like, what floats your boat. So.
And do Kalari Vision have processing videos up on their site?
Yep. So they got the videos that show you that you can download the actions. They show you how to use the actions. They will show you if you don't mind hanging on a bit. I'll share the screen because I've got and I'll show you a few things that they've got on the site because it's a pretty cool site which has got lots of information. So I'll just share screen again. We'll open up the Kalari site. So this is, so I think you can probably see the Instagram page now. This is the one I gave you the link to. So there's all manner of things you can do, colour and the black and whites. And the other thing that's coming in are these filters that go behind the lens. All right, there's a lot of they actually clip in behind the lens, so the filter's not on the front; it's actually in the back of the lens. So a lot of the lens manufacturers are now making these little inserts in the back of the lens, so you can actually put these filters in at the back, not the front, which is pretty cool because it's out of the way, it doesn't get scratched. It's not you don't. So if you've got a nice 12mm lens, you don't have to worry about putting a filter across a 12mm lens. It sits at the back and does all the work, sitting protected out of the way. So they're kind of cool. But let's have a look at the website. So it's, I've misspelled it. Let's have a look at that. All right, so you can all see my Google page.
Yep.
So that's where I pinched the little picture from. So this one here, which is cool, this is on their landing page. So this is the 590 nanometer, and it's got a before and after, all right? So you can actually see what a 590 nanometer will do to that landscape. All right. You can then choose the 720 and then see what a 720 does to the landscape. And you can do the 850 to then see, the strength of the nice black skies and the shadows. So you can have a little bit of a play with that. You can do the, and the full spectrum with 2 spectrums. So this one's, so you actually choose what you're going to do, but you can start mucking around with the colour combinations, and with the full spectrum with 2 spectrums, you can end up getting that look of the old-fashioned infrared with the red foliage and the blue sky and the white grass sort of thing. So you can, so there's all sorts of things you can do. All right, so that on its own gives you a little bit of an introduction about what the filters will do. And on tutorials, it's got a whole section on infrared processing, and so it shows you how to do the red-blue channel swap. Shows you all the, if you want to emulate the various codec filters and the like, and it gives you this is the action suite at the bottom where you can download the actions. All right, so it's got that background information there. It's just got a gallery on its own which shows you what people are doing, playing around with their infrared. You can do workshops, but in the learn about IR is where, or you've got the other things, all right? So you can full explanation on what is full spectrum conversion. So you can read at your leisure all about, what's the best camera to do a full spectrum conversion with. These are the various filters that you can put on with the full spectrum. So depending on what you want to achieve, you can then plant those filters back on the front. Choosing a filter goes through the whole issue of what effects you want, this is where that other picture was, the different color combinations you can have with full spectrum, 2 spectrums. So that was the lens database for hotspotting. All right, so in here, here are all the lenses. What's a good performer, what's a bad performer. They're all the Nikon ones. You can keep on going. They check all the Nikon ones, all the Canon ones, and they'll tell you what one's hotspot, what ones won't. So it's a great resource just to have a look at what you can do, what you can't do. That anomaly with the focus between infrared focus with a diffraction between a DSLR and a mirrorless camera. They can do things like put an extra bit of glass on the back of the sensor to accommodate the refraction difference. There's all sorts of manner of things that they can do for mucking around with your camera and giving you the ability to create and do interesting things. So, great resource.
Tim,
Hugh?
Tim, if you go the full spectrum route and you use the filters, do you can you still use it handheld, or do you have to put it on a tripod?
Yep, still use it handheld. But the other thing to look at would be just the range of lenses now where you can put the filter in the back as opposed to on the front, and that would then also depend on your choice. I know that Nissi, for instance, are now making filters that go into the back of the lenses. So instead of your ND filters, which you've had to screw on the front, there'll now be a range of them coming out as the new lenses come out with that little insert in the back of the lens where you can put the filter in the back of the lens instead of on the front. So much easier to use in the field rather than having to deal with big filter holders at the front.
Yeah.
Sounds like another transfer of wealth.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the thing. As soon as everyone got everything that you got, then you got to find another reason for them to buy something else, haven't you? So that's what R&D is about. That's rip off and distract or something, isn't it? What's the? They've always got to find a new toy to play with, and hopefully it's an improvement. So that's right. Moonrise over Hernandez. Imagine moonrise over Hernandez, and you've got the Joshua trees in white. All right, how cool would that be? So I think there'll be some infrared shots of Joshua trees going on. Now, what's Robin saying? If you get step up down rings, you don't have to buy filters for each lens. Yeah, probably. But as I say, they keep on thinking of new things you can do, and the full spectrum wasn't available at our time. But having said that, I think with the flexibility comes at a price, and it's a bit like having an adjustable desk and an adjustable chair. Once you've done it once, that's usually where it stays, all right? But you've paid for the ability to adjust it. So I think it's a bit like that with a lot of the camera gear, in that, you'll have your whole range of lenses. When I go out shooting now, I tend to, instead of taking 5 lenses, I'm usually only taking 2, all right? So because you know what you're going to shoot, you know how you shoot, you've got your way of shooting after a while, and you don't need all the choice. Or if you need your choice, one day you go shooting with your 12mm, another day you go shooting with your 200mm, and you just it's the game that gets played where you've got to have one of everything. You think you need one of everything, but you don't really, and you just got to be a little bit more retrospective about the choices you make. Yeah.
Mm.
It's just all trial and error.
Yeah, but as with everything, when you that's the idea of groups, is that you can learn from other people's mistakes. so that you work on the basis that everyone else is doing the trialing and erroring, and you can come in there and stand on their shoulders and not have to go through the whole process. Take it to a new level. So that scene behind you, Sarah, would be fantastic in infrared.
It would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah, because you've just got that golden tipping on the reeds. So sunrise in the reeds is a misty morning with sunrise on the reeds is magical. So the other kind of interesting thing, which I went took the IR camera up when the bushfires were up around in the Blue Mountains, and I've got one, and also when it was coming down the harbour, and I've got a shot down at Kirribilli, looking through the smoke where you can see the Opera House on the other side of the harbour, where you couldn't see it standing there, and I've also got a shot where I was trying to catch the Three Sisters with all the smoky background, and I took the shot, and it's as if the smoke's not there. It looks all the way down the valley, looks through all the smoke, and there's no interference by the smoke at all in the image, which was kind of disappointing. So all the things you learn, where some things work, other things don't, and it's all a bit of fun. But as I say, the big gain I think I get from my infrared photography is looking at the world differently, and the information it gives me to then reprocess the way I'm looking at my my normal visible light photography, because you start looking for different details and looking for different things. And when I go out shooting in sort of in a landscape, I can actually see what the
All right, let's have some.
light
Let's
is
have
doing.
some. Whoa! You want some TV?
Let me mute Kerry so she doesn't embarrass herself. All right.
Thanks, Tim. That's great.
But as I say, any questions, shoot them through. And Camera Clinic, that's the one. So Robin's remembered them. I actually had one of my lenses. I've got a Laowa 12mm lens I use for my landscape shooting, and it gets wet with the salt and everything, and they're not really built for the salty rock platforms of Sydney, and some of the screws inside were starting to rust, and the actual aperture ring was seized up. So I sent it off to Camera Clinic, and they actually pulled it all apart, did an oil change and grease on it, sent it back all working order. So they fixed the lens for me quite well, and I believe they are also doing the little infrared conversion. So I don't know what they charge, but as I say, it might be the option where you can do all the research on Kalari Vision's site, and then you can just know exactly what you've got to get Camera Clinic to do. So for those who want something really interesting, you can get your drone converted to infrared. All right. So Kalari Vision do drone conversions as well. So if you want to put everything together, you can do infrared droning over the salt lakes. There you go. How's that? That'll get you a unique image. So something different.
Always.
Too many options.
You can do that first, Tim.
Well, yeah, it's a lot of dedication for the drone. There's a shot I think on the Kalari site which shows the guy's flying over a river in the Amazon or something. All right, he takes one shot with his normal camera, a shot with the IR, and you compare the difference where you end up with a black river amongst this white foliage, or this very green foliage when you can hardly see the river. And they actually, during the Second World War, that's when the infrared cameras and the film were developed, because they could anti-camouflage what was going on in the forest with the infrared film. All right, and that's where it found its mark, because it was looking at a different spectrum, and because it turned all the foliage green, then the metal of whatever was left of the gun emplacement would still be black, so they could pick out the difference with the infrared photography. We'll put this recording up on the website again, and given the status of lockdown, we'll probably do next week's one might be the last one, because I think we're out of lockdown then, and we are thinking of doing night photography. All right, so that'll do everything from steel wool spinning, which to photographing the aurora, to photographing the Milky Way. We'll show you some there's a little a technique for stacking images for the Milky Way to get rid of noise and sharpen up the Milky Way. So there's a few little interesting things there just for nighttime photography, and we'll just do that as a finish up for the sessions that we've been running.
I think we'll do some bioluminescence as well.
Yeah.
Some noctilian scintillans, I think it's called, and the glow-in-the-dark mushrooms as well, the bioluminescent mushrooms, which are reasonably easily found. Yep, and a bit of light painting.
Didn't I think the bioluminescent mushroom won at the Australian Geographic again?
It did. I think that was Callie Cheese picture.
Callie Cheese ones.
Yeah.
So they're kind of cool. But kind of fun in the dark next week. So all the interesting things you can shoot and all the techniques you use for